Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Catch. I'm one of the leaders here at the Rodale Institute. It is a real honor to join you today for today's discussion on human-natured, whole and healthy landscapes with a very special guest, a great friend of the Rodale Institute, Edwina von Gal. We're so glad you're here with us today. We are going to have a very lively discussion on a topic that's really near and dear to our hearts at Rodale Institute. And it's this idea of turning our backyards into whole, regenerative, biological landscapes that can be done in any backyard, anywhere across the continent. And we're really delighted to begin a partnership with Edwina that is going to take further shape throughout the year with additional content. And so your feedback from today's webinar is critically important to the future educational material that we bring forth. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our teacher, and then I'll turn it over to Edwina from there. And before I introduce Edwina, I want to just give a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, we would love to hear from you. So please use the chat function throughout the discussion to share your thoughts, your ideas. But more importantly, if there's a question that you would like to ask or pose to Edwina, we're going to make time for Q&A. And you can do that by using the Q&A function. So Q&A function for any questions, and then the chat function for any other dialogue that you wish to add to the discussion. Everyone that is signed up for today's webinar will receive a link to the recording that should come out sometime tomorrow. So keep a lookout for that in your email. And then I'd encourage you to opt into Rodale Institute's emails to stay informed of other education that is forthcoming, that we really pride ourselves in bringing the very best of our faculty on various topics across regenerative organic agriculture, backyard gardening, and many other subjects. So real honor to have you all here today with us. And with that, I will go ahead and introduce Edwina. So Edwina von Gal creates landscapes with a focus on simplicity, sustainability, and regeneration for private and public clients from around the world. Edwina has collaborated with noteworthy architects such as Maya Lin, Frank Gehry, Annabelle Seldorf, Toshiko Mori on projects for Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren, Larry Gagosian, Robert De Niro, and many, many more. Edwina's work has been published in most major publications, and her book, Fresh Cuts, won the Quill and Trowel Award for Garden Writing. So it is my great honor to introduce today's teacher, Edwina von Gal. Welcome, Edwina.
Thank you, Jeff. It is my delight to now, I guess we'll switch over to the screen. I am so happy to be doing this with Rodale ever since I was a gardener in my late teens. I got the magazine. I was a complete groupie of Rodale. And so for me to be actually doing something with Rodale now is, it's kind of a wildly wonderful dream. So I'm about to, let's see, hopefully this is going to, there we go. Okay, hopefully that's working well. So I have been worried a bit about, as watching through the years, our landscapes, instead of becoming more natural, have become a bit more unnatural. And so in spite of the incredibly wonderful movement towards natural foods, and what we're sort of doing, I think, is a lot of people who haven't really grown up on a landscape or had a garden before they're looking for guidance. And I hope that this is something that we can do. And I do want your feedback on what I might be missing or what you like that we do, so that we can start crafting programs going forward that really address what you want to know and what is helpful and really good information. Everything that Rodale does is science-based, and that is my credo too. We don't make it up. I've done it. Chances are I've done it. Chances are I failed at it. And chances are I'm trying to do it again. So, right. So it's really interesting to me how problems on the land seem to show up first in the water. And this is one of my favorite places to sit. And what everybody is noticing these days is that, well, about 10 years ago, I guess, all across New York State and all across the United States, it was quite remarkable how uniform this response was, that blue-green algae started showing up in our water bodies. And it was largely attributed to our septic issues, but also a lot to our landscapes, because people have giant lawns on the edge of beautiful water bodies. But this is a long time coming, because it takes a long time for all the chemicals to come through the water table and end up in our favorite place to fish. And we'd like to see it go back to what it was when I was a child, because our children really have no idea that there were times when you could jump in any body of water, safe and sound, and pull a fish out, and let's see what we could. So I'm thinking, what's my role here? And what is everybody's role? And what I figured out is that everybody has a role, and it's actually a lot more interesting than sending a donation or writing a petition, because it doesn't matter the size of your, doesn't matter what size your landscape is. It doesn't matter how you do it, other than the fact that you should do it. But how you do it is what, this is the way that it works, and how you take this into your neighborhood, how you take this into your yard. That's the conversation we will be having, I hope, for a really long time. So in addition to what's happening in our waterways, it's happening in our air. So what is missing in our air is about 3 billion birds since the 70s. So this too really brought this home to me, because birds are really the canary in the coal mine. So they're an indication of a collapse of our biodiversity. And without biodiversity, without the entire web of life, our system will start to crumble. And it's what supports us. And why is this happening? Well, it's attributed to loss of habitat, for one thing. So our landscapes have become inhospitable. Now, of course, one always picks a really dramatic photo to make a point. And this is dramatic because I don't even know if a person would step outside into this lawn. But it's just like so inhospitable. But even our ornamental landscapes that everybody loves deserve a closer look, because in many cases they're filled with plants that nothing will eat. Well, nothing will eat. That tells us something, that there's nothing there for wildlife. There's nothing for a bird. There's then, which means there's nothing for butterflies. There's nothing for bees. So the other problem, the other cause of the bird decline is the use of pesticides. And we are spraying our yards at an unprecedented rate, in spite of most of us recognizing the value of organic food. We're not necessarily extending that thinking into our lawns and landscapes, because a lot of times we are being told by professionals that you can't get what you want without chemicals. So there's two things to think about there. Number one is that actually true? Because plants did really well without us for a very long time without chemicals. And number two is maybe what you want, maybe what you're trying for is not perhaps the best goal, because there are certain things that people are trying to do with landscapes these days that probably can't be done without chemicals, which is like making the outside of your life the same as the inside. Like, so if you want your living room to be ant-free, that's totally understandable. But if you want your landscape to be ant-free, that is really not a great goal, because you will start collapsing the entire system. And then you start affecting the lives that really matter to you, your children and your pets. And they are being exposed to chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. And I'm sure you kind of know this story, but we use up to 10 times more chemicals on our home landscapes than agriculture uses on equivalent amounts of space. That's a lot. And that's because we're not eating our landscapes. So the regulations are very different. And everybody just thinks, well, more is more. I'll just pour it on. And what is the problem with that is what we now know is our gut biome. We used to think that we had solved the problem by getting rid of DDT, and that these new sophisticated chemicals only attack bacteria or fungi or insects. All of those things, that's what is inside of us. That's our gut biome. That's what's running us. That's what they're running the world. And we're learning more and more. It's the soil biome. It's what promotes health and wellness and psychological wellness, and it as well as physical wellness in all of us. And so that's the goal. And so how do you do it? So what am I talking about here? How do I make a landscape that keeps all of this alive and also suits my needs for myself and my family and living outside? So here's a quick overview of what whole and healthy landscaping is. And yes, it's organic, Yes, it's permaculture. Yes, it's biodynamic. It's all of those things, but it's bigger than all of those things because it's a complete ecosystem. It is not extractive. So what a farm or your vegetable garden is extractive, which that means you're growing it to take what it produces out. So you're constantly pulling stuff out. So the chances are that, yeah, you're going to need to put something back at some point to keep that soil healthy. But your landscape is not. That's there for everything else to eat, but we're not sharing very well at all. So we're refusing to let anything nibble on any of the leaves of our landscape, and yet we're not eating them. And so, but there are things that really need them. Your landscape is a salad bar for everything to keep this, and your landscape matters because it's too far for a bee to fly around and find a place or a bird that is suitable for them. Those places aren't big enough and are close enough together anymore. They're too far apart, those natural areas. So every place needs to be a natural area. And not only is it healthy, it's really fun and it's super interesting. So this is the list of what we're going to do. And the first thing you have to do is make the commitment. So your major commitment is do no harm and no cheating. So chemicals are harmful, and like attacking your landscape in order to subdue it is harmful. And if you cheat, it means that you're not looking for a better solution. You're going back. Cheating is really no way to have a relationship, as everybody knows. And so why cheat? You're only cheating yourself. I mean, nobody else is really going to come to your door and say, stop that. But you'll know. And so it's really by making that initial commitment, suddenly you're heading down this amazing new path. And what you want to do is make a plan. And that sounds tedious, but it's actually not, because all you have to do is take a piece of trace paper and put it over that funky survey that you got when you bought your house, or you can even just print out a Google Earth photo. So that's everything you've got or what you want to have. So, but first you really got to know what you've got. So obviously you need to know where your structures are, and you need to know your plants, because plants are the basis of everything. Plants are the only thing in the earth that actually collect an energy. So everything that new that's coming into the earth is coming from the sun. And all of that is being managed by plants. So without healthy plants, we're kind of sunk. So how many healthy plants can you cram into your landscape to serve every possible life form? That's my personal goal. You don't have to go quite that far. But first of all, you got to know the name of your plants, because can you imagine raising your children without knowing their names, or just even existing in a community without knowing names? And once you know their names, you also have to know a little bit about what they like. And so you're going to be putting them in a place they like. And that is the first step to making sure you don't have to they're not a patient for the rest of their lives. They're actually a thriving member of the community. So then you want to look at the basic practical things of your site, like where's the sun, where's the shade? Because if you want to create a nice place to sit, chances are you're going to want some shade. And so you're going to site yourself accordingly. So you put all the hardscape around, and then you're just going to look at your soils. Have you held a handful of soil, and you just hold it in your hand, and you close your fist, and you open your fist again? If it looks like a little muffin, that's pretty good soil. If it looks like a gooey lump, that's probably clay. If it falls apart and falls out of your hand, that's kind of sandy. I'm not suggesting you should change your soil entirely, other than continue to build its health and happiness and its biome, because you can't really change the entire soil of a neighborhood. I mean, if you start, it just goes on forever. But what you can do is choose plants and choose purposes of things that evolved with that soil, so they will be happy there. And then you're going to look at drainage. Is water running right off your site? Dig a hole, fill it with water. How fast does that waterfall disappear? That's a component you have to take into into consideration. And your views, are there views in the distance that are really beautiful that you might block if you throw a big hedge or a tree up? Or are there views that really need a hedge or a tree to make them, you know, to give you privacy and everything? So the other thing is, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want? So is it all that you want is to make your property more biodiverse? Well, that's great. But you might also be, usually when I get hired as a landscape designer, what I find is that there is some other incentive more than somebody just woke up and decided to hire a landscape designer. They usually are building an addition, or they just bought the house, or they're building an entire house, or they want to put in a pool. So that's usually at the top. You cite your structures, and where is your patio? Where is your porch? Where is your parking? But then where should your vegetable garden go? Now that just about everybody is using raised beds, and there are a lot of wonderful, Rodale has lots of great information on that. You don't have to be quite so locked into putting your vegetable garden where the soil is best on your property. You can pretty much pick anywhere. I really highly recommend raised beds because they do give you so much control over the soil, and you don't need to spend as much time digging, double digging or stuff like that. And then you want a flower garden. Is that flower garden for you? Or for, are you thinking about pollinators? And then you have play space for your kids and your pool. And then you have all that other space. And so is that going to be all lawn? Or what do you think? Because as you can see here, you don't have to use the traditional responses to where lawn has to go. A pool can go, does not have to have lawn around it. I love doing pools without lawn around them. And there's still room for the kids to run around and fall in the pool. But, and this lawn on the left is a lawn that is done completely without chemicals. And so that's the lawn space for this family. They were entertained, there's a place to hang out. And then everything else has been given over to natural plantings. Oh, what has happened here? For some reason, it is not forwarding. There we go. Okay, so, nope, backwards. Then the big question, this is where we enter new territory. What does your place want? And what your place wants is going to be good for the planet. So your place and the inhabitants of your place, and this is also, you have control over this. I'm assuming you want pollinators, they want food. I'm assuming you want birds, they want food. I'm assuming the food for the birds wants food. Chickadees need 3,000 to 6,000 caterpillars to raise one nest of young. And they need to raise 2 or 3 nests of young in a season in order to maintain a stable population. So if you don't have about 18,000 caterpillars on your property, you probably aren't going to be supporting chickadees. And if you spray every time you see something nibbling on your leaf, you have just really reduced your chickadee population. Chickadees can only travel maybe not even a quarter of a mile. It's too much energy to waste looking way down the other end of the neighborhood, going to that place on the edge of town to find a caterpillar and back. So they need caterpillars that are eating your trees and your shrubs. And a tree is designed, it's a salad bar, it is designed to lose 10 to 20% of its leaf surface every year as part of this food web. I call it the food loop. And if we can't close the food loop on our own properties, how are we going to do it for the whole earth? And so they also need shelter. So people are crazy cutting down trees and cleaning up their properties, but that doesn't provide places for people, for birds and other wildlife to live. I mean, you can put up bird houses, but you also, it's just really nice to provide some natural spaces for them. So if your tree has a hole in it, don't have somebody block it up or cut it down. That's a really important habitat spot. And they also need water. So it's nice in the wintertime to make sure that and in very dry summers, that you have some water out there for your wildlife. It's amazing. It's good as a bird feeder. And oh dear, I don't know what is wrong here, but sorry, this is not going forward. Okay, here it goes back. So first thing you got to do, the next thing you got to do is you got to choose the right plants. So when places are cleared for human habitation, obviously a whole lot of habitat got lost there. And most often what people do is they go out and buy those exotic plants. They do anything except what it used to look like, even though they chose this place for its beauty. And then they do their best to make it look like something else. But wherever you live, hopefully, ideally, if you travel a little bit of distance, you will come to a place that is natural. You will come to a place that expresses the native plants of that place. So you might not have a pond on your plan, but you can still take amazing inspiration from plants that grow in all the different kinds of habitats. So look around your neighborhood and find habitats with soil and with conditions that might mimic what your place used to be before it got cleared and built on. This is a Winterberry, an Ilex Fortissilata. It likes growing by water, but it can grow very well in your own yard. And I call this, like this system, copy that. You go out, you find a beautiful composition of plants, take a picture, bring it home, and copy it in your own landscape. And like, this is a wild planting, but this sure beats Pachysandra in my book. This is Phlox variegata. So it's really easy to use native plants, just looking at what was in this place and what would be happy in this place. That's going to save you a whole lot of time. So you do have more time to learn about those plant names, and you do have time to learn about the associations that these plants have with the insects that they evolved with. And what about later in the summer? Because that's spring, and this is late summer. Your New England aster, which is an absolute, and there's Verbena hastata in there that's already come and gone. But then that'll have seeds for the birds in the winter. And this is like monarch magnet. This property had nothing on it when we started. And as soon as we got these asters blooming, it was just an insane cloud. And this is really a fairly traditional garden. It's not like a meadow. Meadows are great. They're not always easy. So we hope to do a whole course on meadows, and there are some good ones out there. But as meadow is part of your landscape, because, and then this is another kind of meadow, less flowers, because this is a meadow that has a lot of deer pressure, but still going into the fall, it's incredibly beautiful. There still is a lot of ecosystem service here. This is switchgrass, and in the background is Nissus sylvaticus, which are the pepperidge tree. They're also called black gum tupelo. It has a lot of common names, that tree. And good old sumac, I mean, traditionally considered a weed, but I think we have to really rethink what weeds are. Doug Tallamy is saying, let's take weed out of the name, like butterfly weed should be what a butterfly plant, because it's not a weed. It's a native wildflower. And then in the winter, here's that Ilex Fortissilata again, the Winterberry. So thinking about what not only is beautiful for you, but is edible for birds, because once these berries freeze and thaw enough times, then they become edible. So the birds are not inclined to eat them earlier in the season, and nature actually saves them for them till later when they've freeze thawed enough to make them tender and full of sugar. But there are plants you need to really watch out for, which is one of the really important things about knowing the names of plants and knowing that what's native and what's not. This is butterfly bush. It has now become invasive. It's banned in many states. It does not actually provide all that much for butterflies, just nectar, which they like, but that's like putting out a sweet drink for kids, and they'll all flock around, but there's really no meal there. And please be very, very careful with butterfly bush. And because people say, well, what's the big deal about invasives? Well, it can get this bad. It doesn't always. But for instance, I have been, I sort of ignored all of this, but we didn't even know when Miscanthus sinensis first came on the market. It was just like a wonder plant. But 30 years ago, I planted 3 of those in this garden. And this is what has happened to the adjacent field. It is 100% miscanthus now. So all of the wildflowers are gone. And it's just one dense, impenetrable stand that is not really of any use to anything because it's an exotic plant. There, we have no natural predators or nothing that is interested in it. So what are you going to do to get information on all of this? So I started a website called 2/3 for the Birds. It's based on Doug Tallamy's research that birds need 2/3 native plants in their native range. So it's just filled. So you're wondering, how do I know? Where do I go? Cooperative Extension is a great source. On the website is a list of all the native plant databases. And there are lots of them. Audubon has a really good one. So you can start looking at plants. You just plug in your zip code and start looking at plants. I wish I could recommend an app so you could just take a photo of the plants in your backyard to know if they are native. If you know one that works, please let me know. The fact is that the ones I've tried, the plants I knew, many of them were wrong. And if you don't know, how are you going to know when they're wrong? So I'm hoping that this technology is going to improve, and I hope they're working on a way that it can be corrected, and keep me posted, because I really want to give people easy ways to get to know what is a native and what is not, and then start choosing and putting a lot of pressure on your local garden center to stock natives. And so you've got your plants chosen, and I never thought I would be a native plant person. I used to be the one who wanted to try absolutely every plant. The more difficult, the better. You know, like, oh, I've grown that one. But the fact is, I now want plants that really don't ask a lot of me, that I can just enjoy. I'm sort of, maybe I'm just old, or maybe I've really truly changed, you know, that's possible sometimes. And so, but one of the things I can do for them, they're asking little of me and they're delivering so much, but to start them out well. So number one is to plant plants properly. And this is an example of trees grown properly, but they're old. And look at how the base of that tree on the right is flared. That's the way a tree looks. Trees very, very seldom at all anymore have an opportunity to grow from seed. And one of the amazing things about the soil biome and the mycorrhizal network is that we now know that parent plants recognize their young, and they send them special nutrients and stuff. So that sweet relationship doesn't happen. So you might want to consider letting a baby tree grow up near its parent if you can, but you're going to be buying trees and planting them, and you're going to need to think about really the right way to plant them. And that's a challenge, because in today's world, the nursery practices are sending trees into the world that are way too deep, either too deep in their pots or too deep in a root ball. And that is way a tree looks. It looks like a post stuck in the ground, no flare. And what you're seeing, because this one, someone was starting to clear around this, what you're seeing is adventitious roots. So this tree is sending out roots that aren't true roots, just any attempt to get some oxygen, because its true roots are way too deep, where the oxygen is in much scarcer supply, and it can't breathe. And ultimately, this tree will struggle. It may live, but it won't live well. And oftentimes they get girdling roots. There's vertical cracking. There's a lot of water sprouts all up and down the trunk. It's not a happy life. And this is what a lot of people are doing now. Before they even put the tree in the ground, they're opening up the burlap, which used to be something that you just never did, and taking that top layer of soil away until you find the true roots. With certain trees, you just really can't do that because the root ball will fall apart. So all you can do is plant it really high. And there's an old saying, plant it low, never grow, plant it high, never die. So I usually figure if there's probably a guaranteed 3 to 5 inches of extra soil on any root ball. So if you plant a good 3 to 5 inches high, even if you don't take that much soil off, it's not going to hurt the tree because they like being high. And this is one that came out of a container. And oh dear, you know, what's going to happen to that tree over time? Those roots are, as the trunk grows, the roots will strangle it. So what you do with container material, take all the, I completely bare root them and feather the roots out, or if it's too big for me to handle, start little by little over time cutting those roots. You don't want to do it all at once. That's kind of a shock, but it's something you just need to be aware of and manage. So then you got them planted, and this actually, I didn't mention, goes for all stuff in pots. Every plant you buy is probably not at the right height, or it's in terrible potting mix because soil is super expensive and in scarce supply. So nobody really pots in good soil. So what they do is you'll find pots full of peanut shells or wood chips and things like that. So that stuff, if it gets dry, it's called hydrophobic. It's really hard to wet it again. And you'll often find a plant that didn't do well if you dig it up. Right in the middle of its root mass is a hard, dry knot. So if the plant's still alive, spread that out. I always say if a plant's not doing well and you can't figure it out quite, you have to pretend it's in the doctor's office and you say, take off your clothes. You know, there's no other way to figure this out. I got to get right into your underwear here. And you just pull the root ball apart and see if you don't find a little knot of an original pot. And then it was potted up, and there's just this, and you just have to soak it in water, gently feather it out, and then put it back in the soil, and you'll probably have a much better chance of success and health. So now they're growing, you got them in the ground, and then you have to maintain them. Obviously, if they're native plants, their maintenance is very minimal if you've got the right plant in the right place. So if it likes sandy soil, if it likes acid soil, if it likes heavy soil, full sun, shade, these are the things you really need to know, and you really need to ask before you put a plant in the ground, because otherwise you're just working at total cross purposes, and you will become a slave to keeping some poor suffering plant alive. And that doesn't make sense for either of you. So what do they need? Well, it comes back to food. Everything comes back to food. But the old saying, you feed the soil, not the plants. So true. Something else just whizzed by my brain for so many years, until now we're really recognizing the fact that fertilizer feeds the plants in a way that's like Gatorade for breakfast. You know, it's not really a meal. It goes straight to the energy center, and sure, it throws out a lot of growth, but that isn't really building a plant's health or a plant's immune system. It's got to be in the biome. It's got to be in the soil. And how do you build good soil? With good old organic matter, compost. And how do you build it? And since we're on, those were grassroots, and everybody wants to know about grass and lawn, and how can you really do a lawn without chemicals? So just one divergence here. If you have good roots and you have good blades, so it's all coming from the sun, so you want those leaf blades to be as long and as healthy as possible. So it's mow to 4, cut to 3. And that way you have a lot of leaf blade. You also have a very dense growth that shades out weed seeds. Most weed seeds are warm season opportunistic. They need an open patch of earth that has access to soil, lots of sun, lots of water. That's when you get weeds. So weeds are generally an indication of the fact that your lawn grasses are weak in an area. Always go back to the cause. Don't treat the effect. So if you go out with a weed killer and you kill the weeds, you've just made an opportunity for more weeds. If you don't actually fix the reason that your lawn isn't filling in that space. But the taller and more carpet-like, this is my idea of what a lawn carpet is, not when it's cut short. When it's cut short, it's like a haircut that your scalp is going to get burned. And that's bad for the tree roots, for the grass roots, and it's bad for the soil, and it promotes a lot of problems. And so when you're cutting your lawn, and if you're sending all of that to the dump, then not only are we overloading our landfills with methane producing grass clippings, but you're taking away the product, the food that your lawn made for itself. That is food your lawn would prefer to eat is its own organic matter, because that's what's going to build the soil. And so if you use a mulching mower and you chop it up really fine and you put it right back down, your lawn is continually fed. Do not water before you mow, because then you'll get large slimy chunks all over your lawn. And so at least leave at least a day for your lawn to dry out before you mow. If there are areas where you do walk immediately after mowing, well, you could blow or rake them off in that area, but I'm willing to bet that it's highly unlikely that you walk on your entire lawn within half a day of your mowing it. The clippings will be gone. If your lawn is functioning and you have a really good biotic action, those clippings are gone in half a day. And the other thing you want in your lawn, you desperately need in your lawn, is clover, and that is my dog, Clover. And clover is a nitrogen fixer. No, it is not native. It's one of the exotics that we have come to love and found a really great home. But clover was removed from grass seed mixes as a kind of a marketing thread, because when they started using broadleaf killers to get rid of dandelions, they lost the clover, but without the clover, you could sell more fertilizers. So hopefully we're all just going to get over that marketing and that perception that clover's bad and get back to clover, because clover is great. And when your lawn is longer, you don't see the clover as much, but clover heals a lot of ills. Not only does it feed your lawn, but it fills in a lot of weak spots, because it holds up a whole lot better in hot weather than lawn grasses do, because they're all cool season plants. And another kind of food for your landscape is dead wood. And this dead wood, which is a standing tree called a snag, that's like an amazingly, I think it's kind of an endangered ecosystem, because everything loves a dead tree. There will be birds nesting in there. There'll be all kinds of insects that they crawl, the birds are just all over it. Things move up and down. They do not fall apart in large chunks. They actually fall apart little chunks at a time. No, you don't want to leave one next to your car or right next to your house or next to your swing set. But if you can find a place on your property to leave either entire dead trees, or do not cut the dead wood out of your trees if there's a dead branch here or there. They are very specific ecosystems, and our overly tidy landscapes have removed all of that. And it's a whole ecosystem of insects and birds that serves, that you're removing. So just leave them there, unless once again, they're gonna fall on you. You don't need to do that. And if you do take a tree down, consider ways that you can keep it on your property. Maintain all your biomass. That's my personal goal, to see if I can meet this challenge, is to keep every bit of biomass, everything that my property produces, I keep it on my property. So that's my Monet haystack, which is when I cut my meadow, it goes into a stack, and each year we make a different stack and it just melts in place, or we can use it for mulching and composting. Logs make great walls. I use them to screen like my air conditioners and things that I don't want to see, or just make temporary divisions. And little by little, they melt down. And I even found a patch of morels in one of my old wall bases. You can use wood chips if you want to get rid of all the branches and things. They make great garden paths. And I found that over time, my garden paths are actually a great source of some compost. If I'm digging nearby, I can just pull back the chips and dig up a really good scoop of beautiful compost, and then put the chips back on. But chips are great for any kind of path where you maybe have too much sun to bother, that like it's just too much of a challenge to grow grass there, and it's always that slimy, sort of muddy spot that you can never get the grass to go. Consider just replacing it with chips, and all kinds of wonderful things might happen. So if you have the space, you can go really whole hog with composting, but composting is the final result of everything that you have, that your land produces. And it's also the beginning. It's the beginning of your soil health. So when you put it on your beds every fall, spring, I'm always spreading compost all over my beds. The amount of compost that you produce is going to be, to some extent, related to how energetic you are in managing your compost piles. But this is a whole other course, because these are just tasters of the courses of all the things that we want to teach you. But composting is so easy. I mean, you can really take a totally, just throw it in the heap approach. If you come back in 2 years, at the bottom of that heap is going to be compost. But if you want your compost in 2 months from now, you can do it. Rodale has amazing composting piles. I hope you all get to see them sometime. It's just remarkable what they can do in a relatively short, a very short amount of time, but they're serious about managing it. Now in the background there is that green thing. That's actually a company called Green Johanna, but any one of these closed systems will work. This is for your kitchen waste, because if you put kitchen waste in your regular compost heap, it probably will attract rodents. And you probably won't be happy about that. And they do a good job of turning your compost, but still, you know, it isn't high on everybody's list of the kind of wildlife they're looking for. So these closed systems are terrific. You can put meat, fish, and eggs in them, dairy, because that's really the problem with composting animal matter is the rodents also. Some pathogen issues, but once these things get cooking, it's really not a problem. I just fill one and set it aside. By the time I fill the second one, the first one's pretty much done. But the thing you are not going to do with your compost or your mulch is this, I sure hope, the toilet plunger look, which has become a tremendous fashion in landscaping. Certainly everywhere I've seen, I would imagine you have too. And this, just like by adding the daffodils, they just really, like that was like, this is a gas station near my house, and that just did it, you know, for me, because this tree is trying to breathe. To breathe. You know, this tree is going to be weakened. It's going to send out roots. It's going to girdle itself over time. None of the trees that has this kind of toilet plunger at its base is probably looking at a really resilient and healthy future. So when you see this happening, I always wonder, like, am I going to be one of the old lady, you know, shaking my umbrella? Please don't do that. The landscapers told me that they do it because their clients like it. It looks like they've done something. When is the landscape industry going to be the one that tells the client, I'm sorry, this isn't proper practice? So it's not happening that way. So I'm asking you to turn it the other way. We, the owners of the property or the decision makers on the property, have to tell our landscape industry, no, that is not good practice. Or this. So a bed of really raw wood chips with tiny little plants. Plants are social beings. They like to touch. They like the wind. If you look at a natural system, there's no space. There's no open space, mulch, dirt, nothing. It's chock-a-block. So rather than do this, these plants are going to have a really hard time ever growing into each other like this, because those wood chips are going to cause them to get chlorotic because it's locking up all the nitrogen. There's no opportunity for things to seed naturally and increase from seed. This kind of mulch is a growth suppressant, right? You're suppressing the growth of weeds. Well, why would it stop at weeds? It's suppressing the growth of the plants you want. So why not take all of those plants that you can afford to buy and that you can care for and cram them all together and make a 5x5 garden? And then as those plants happily start to explode, just dig some and keep moving your garden bigger. The other way you can do it is actually intentionally plant seeds between your plants. There are great things like Rudbeckia nitida, that's the native black-eye Susan, that'll come up and it smothers. It comes up so fast, it just smothers the weeds. And people say, oh, I don't like that plant because it disappears in 2 years. Well, actually, that's what it was evolved to do. It comes in, it colonizes, it protects the plant you want by smothering out the ground plane of other more competitive weeds that might come up. And then it blooms and it's fabulous and it shades and it holds moisture. And then when the plants you want really start to muscle, the Rudbeckia steps away. And this is, of course, You may laugh and say, oh, yeah, right, I'm going to do this. But this garden is actually very low maintenance. This is one I did for some clients, and they wanted to use chemicals, but they also wanted bees. And like the choice was clear in the end. Like you can't spray. You can't spray for mosquitoes. You can't spray for ticks. You will kill your bees. And so I'm sort of trying to talk everybody into getting bees, because it just changes your whole attitude towards like, what am I doing? Why am I killing things? And bees, but of course, I'm a big fan of bees, native bees, because they really evolved with our native plants. Honeybees are not native, but they evolved with our food plants. So they both play a really important role in our lives and in our landscapes. But native bees actually don't sting, most of them. They're too small, or they're just not interested, and they don't cause allergic reactions. So you can really do amazing things with native bees. I highly recommend looking at a site by Sam Droege, but just go into the Two-Thirds for the Birds site, and there's a lot of information about native bees. So the other thing, of course, that is shelter. Habitat is food, shelter, water. And this is what your garden is. That's what a whole and healthy landscape is, a habitat garden. It's habitat for you, and it's a habitat for all other life on Earth. So shelter, none of the biome in this soil is going to really do very well through the winter. So you might want to think about putting those leaves that were just blown away back on. And why not take your twigs and make a home for thrushes? And watering is the thing everybody does wrong. You need to water seldom and deep, and you should not be watering now. In the spring, the roots should be going down looking for water. So when the weather starts getting hot, they're not on the surface. They're deep down where it's cool, and they will be resilient if things get dry. Use a soil meter, a moisture meter. It's the best thing. This way you will know before you water, and you will know when you're watering, how much to give. And so what if you, after you get all this going and everything is happy and growing along, then you get to relax? Because somebody said to me the other day, I have this moss garden, and I don't do anything. And I never weed it. I don't have to do anything. So what should I do? And I said, well, how about just like relaxing? I suppose you could learn the names of the mosses. That's a challenge. But what about you just lie on your back and look up at the trees? Watch what happens. All sorts of amazing things can happen in your garden if you step back. So for instance, do you know what the bugs are? Like if you start watching bugs, and would you think I have to kill that? But I'm just starting to learn these things. This is the larva of a lacewing. And these guys, little guys, are really, really voracious aphid eaters. So, don't, just because the bug is ugly doesn't mean it deserves to die. And what about weeds? The thing about, like, what if you just stop mowing and watch what happens in certain places? This is my meadow, and I stopped mowing, and amazing things came up. And what if you just didn't spray your driveway with Roundup for a while and see what happens? And over time, my driveway's gotten really amazing, and I just mow the center strip so I can walk there in my bare feet. And the rest, the cars take care of by driving on it. And the deer have eaten all the butterfly weed, but now what's happening native over time is other plants are moving in. Euthymia graminifolia, which is the grass leaf goldenrod, excellent plant for deer resistance. And it's beautiful. It serves so many pollinators. So what if we did this? If we did all this? I mean, we could go back to a time that is idyllic. I really think so. And I hope that you will join me on this amazing adventure. Thank you.
Wow, Edwina, thank you so much. That was incredible. It was extremely informative. It was inspiring. And I think the greatest takeaway that I had from these last few moments together was how everything you taught was really in reach for all of us. We can all play a role in building biodiversity and turning our backyards into a great symphony of nature, and one that regenerates our earth and heals it. And thank you so much for all that you taught. We do have a number of questions in the chat. We have just about 10 minutes remaining, and so we'll just jump right into some of the questions. The first one comes from Lindsay, And Lindsay asks, what do you do with diseased plants that you remove from your garden? Do you burn them to create biochar for the compost, or do you make an exception and throw them away so they don't harm other healthy plant life?
Well, it depends on the disease. And one of the really things that I think that is important to learn, and I will probably, I'm still learning, but it's sort of what killed that plant. So some diseases are not transmissible. Like if a disease was killed by aphids, the aphids aren't going to survive your compost pile. And a lot of times the diseases, it's really the fungal diseases that are a problem for people. So I have a separate compost pile that we call the dirty compost. And so what we do is we layer it, and then we layer it with cardboard. And on top of that, we layer chips and then do more of the dirty compost. And that's things like mugwort, which, you just can't kill, and fungal problems. One of the things, I used to bag it up and send it to the landfill. And then I realized, oh no, they're making compost. They're sending my weeds back across the entire neighborhood. It's going all over town. I can't do that. And so, yeah, there are some fungus problems. Most of the really bad fungus problems occur on non-native plants, like if you have a fungal problem on an apple tree or something like that. So yeah, you could burn it. One way to do it is just solarize it, which I do in a very informal way, is just leave it in the sun. Put it out on a sidewalk, or put it on your pool patio, someplace really hot. A fungus cannot survive that.
Thank you. Next question comes, it's actually a pretty straightforward question. You had mentioned the composting barrel that you featured at one point. Could you just share the name of that one more time for the audience?
Yeah, it's green. I don't know whether, I suppose if you use the Swedish pronunciation because it's made in Sweden, it's Johanna. So it's either Johanna or Johanna. And if you go to Green Johanna USA, I think you can even get them on Amazon or places like that. Do not get the green cone. The green cone is interesting, but it's a very specific audience because that's just a biodigester that puts your kitchen waste into the ground, but there's no harvesting to be done. So if you lived in a city apartment, you wanted to just like biodigest your kitchen, you would bury it and you just throw stuff in there, it goes into the ground, but get the above ground one.
Great. And to that end, I just want to share with the audience, Edwina did mention that Rodale Institute does do extensive education on composting, and there's tremendous resources you'll find on our website. You'll notice that we do webinars throughout the year teaching how to compost. And of course, all of our information can be found on our website, and we encourage you to go there to learn more. Another question, there was a lot of questions around lawn care, so I'm just going to lump them into one big question. One of our viewers asked, how often do you cut the clover? What grass seed do you recommend for large areas? And what about small areas? So if you could just speak a little bit more to some of those questions around lawn care, that was quite informative.
Yeah, and I know, and I like never thought I would ever be talking about lawns, because to me as a landscape designer, they were just like what you did, with like, just like you do the lawn, like what says it's, and that filled in that space, But I am lucky enough to work with a guy who's really good. So if there are questions that I don't answer properly, or you need a little bit more, I can go to our lawn expert, and that's through Perfect Earth Project. So you can reach me here or through Edwina at perfectearthproject.org, and we will answer. But typically, well, to mow your lawn, if you're going to be really, there's just levels. It's just like compost. Like, how nuts do you want to get? Like, and that's not derogatory in any way. Any plant, I'm way into growing it and growing it well. So if you want to grow the world's best lawn without chemicals, I want to see the pictures, and I want to spread them around and tell people how well it works. So if you want to grow perfectly, it's cut to 3. Grow to 4, cut to 3, right? So the frequency is simply based on that, because at different times of the year, your clover and your grass are going to grow at different rates. If you have just a clover lawn, nothing else, you don't have to mow it at all. But it's hard to keep a clover lawn as just to keep clover lawn, because other things will move in over time. And clover and grass have a really nice relationship that's kind of symbiotic, so they get along well. Oh, so what else was it, Jeff?
Oh, great. How about different types of, how would you manage small areas and large areas? Are there differences in how you manage these areas of lawn?
Not really. The big differences are sun and shade and soil types, and also the kind of wear they get. So the best lawn overall, just general all around lawn mixes, probably in most parts of the country except Southern Florida, and in places where you're really not supposed to water at all, like I guess, but it is largely tall turf type fescues, and maybe you put in like a 10% bluegrass. Bluegrass is a heavy feeder and more prone to disease, but it's stoloniferous, so it knits the other. The fescues are like much more individual little plants, and so what you want is that bluegrass all growing through and knitting it together and filling in every little space between the fescues, so that there's less room for weeds to get in. And great. That's a pretty good standard. We do publish on Perfect Earth Project has a lawn handbook. You can check it out on our website. And I don't know whether, and so these are all the things that over time, me dragging Rodale into the world of stuff that people can't eat. So, this whole other part of the other half of the world. So we will see what resources we should probably work on developing further. But it's always, thank you for, this is good for us to know that the interest in lawn is high, and we will definitely do our best to keep putting information out. But it's really, the watering is the key thing. Do not water in the spring. Do not fertilize in the spring. Do not wake your lawn up before it is ready to wake up. If you have ever woken up your kid from a nap before they were ready, you are dealing with a mess somewhat later in the day. And that's what your lawn will do. Don't force it to wake up before it's ready.
I think we have to thank you, Edwina. I think we have time for one more. It looks like maybe a yes or a no question before we come to the end here. The question comes from Yvonne, and the question is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, is ajuga an acceptable ground cover? Ajuga.
Yeah, it's not native, and it doesn't matter. I in fact have quite a bit of it in my lawn, in an area that I don't. I let it run wild through some wild areas, and for me it's like anything but mulch. If ajuga is going to cover this space little by little, I'm looking at other things, but it's in bloom right now and it's really lovely, and it's sort of found its own with a bunch of warm season grasses, and it's so when we cut the lawn areas back, it's there. Little by little, I've been working with playing around with a new ground cover, not so new, really very old, the American Pachysandra. So try that out. It just takes longer to establish, but it's incredibly beautiful.
Great, fantastic. Well, the feedback thus far in the chat has been overwhelmingly positive. Thank you so much, Edwina, for leading us in this most informative discussion today, and for all that you're doing to champion for a regenerative earth. We're grateful. Rodale Institute is thrilled to be partnering with you, and we look forward to building further education in the months and years to come. So thank you to all of our attendees. For further information, rodaleinstitute.org. Please opt in for our emails and opt into our social media and stay informed on all of our forthcoming education. So with that, that concludes today's webinar. Have a great day and a great week, and happy gardening. Thanks again.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everybody. Bye.